when they are on the podium. The order of tonight is that we will listen to our three excellent speakers consecutively, and after the third speaker, all three will take their seats on the podium. The plate will then be removed, of course, and then the round of questions and answers can take place. And then you'll see me again. My name is Evert Stamhuis. I am a professor here in this University for Criminal Law, and I also am affiliated to the University of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. So this is more or less what I had to do before I could announce the first speaker, which is the chairman of the Good Governance Foundation of Aruba, Armand Hessels. His role, I think, in society is quite clear to all of you. He has a very long career in improving the conditions for Aruban citizens while he was in education. Very much so. If you walk around or drive around with him on the island, he sees former pupils everywhere, from high to low in this society. So you all be aware of the fact that he knows what he can talk about. His speech will carry the title "A Shocking Experience." Armand Hessels.
Thank you, Mr. Stamhuis, and of course to all of you, welcome. And I want to extend a special welcome to the Prime Minister of Aruba, that being here really shows her commitment to realize good governance. Thank you very much. Tonight my task is a very easy one. It's a very short one too, because it consists only in exposing the question. But of course that question has a little bit of a history. And I think it's good for you also to get into that history in order to understand much better what the two second speakers, which have much more knowledge of the theme, are going to explain to you all. As Mr. Stamhuis told you, the theme, it's not working good. The theme of, of my speech is a shocking experience. And the shocking experience started when I began analyzing the way governance was taking place. And in order to do that, I made use of really dozens and dozens of reports and documents where I really came to a much better understanding of the way governance was taking place. And it took me to the realization that in order for everybody in Aruba to understand how it was done, that I had to make another means of explaining the things. Instead of making reports with all the things together, I made themes, reports made around themes. And the first theme was the way the personnel policy was taking place during decades in Aruba. Second theme was about the financial administration. The third theme about transparency. The fourth, as you can see, about the way our parliament is functioning. The fifth theme is not on this place, but it is a report that I finished in the beginning of December, last December, which describes the social economic policy which has taken place during decades in Aruba. And the sixth theme is fortunately my last theme, which will has a topic integrity in Aruba, and which of course will be, I think, the most interesting report. Now, based on the reports, I tried to make it even more simple for all people, and I put this all in a presentation. The presentation takes about 40 minutes, and it describes the way governance was being done during 31 years. And that presentation was given last, let's say 5 weeks ago, and is now available on our website, even with spoken text. So if you did miss it 5 weeks ago, please, I'll show you the way you can get it on the website at the end of this presentation. Now, okay, the main conclusions that I got from these reports are what you can see here in this red circle that I mentioned as the three main elements of bad governance. They were very important focus points in the total of governance during 31 years. And I don't think I say something which is very new to you if I say that political patronage was it was used very much in the total of governance. Besides political patronage, the efficient way the financial administration was taking place, and a very important part, the last element of what I call governance, was the suspicious way projects were being dealt with. Now, if you hear them, and most of you have heard about them a lot of times, what most people don't realize is that all these things really cost a lot of money. It has to be financed. And during a long time, a big chunk of the financement was coming from the budget deficit, because almost every year, and at least at the end of every government period, the government ended up with I'll mention, improvement of the debt. It was growing. Every time it was growing. And you will see later, with the debt also was growing the interest that we are paying. Now, budget deficits are one side, but also you can see during the years that, especially after the CFP came and prohibited let's say, the existence of budget deficits, then a lot of money was being extracted from the different departments, from education, from the infrastructure, things, etc. And of course, one thing that you all know about is a lot of tax increases, which lowered the buying force of the people. Now, one result, one consequence that we all know about is the growing of the debt. And as I told you, one of the things that grew with the debt was the interest we are paying, which this year is mounting up at 230 million, which is per day 630,000 florins. So every day we are paying what is worth 4 modest homes or 2 big houses every day of the year. And if you see it per month, which is 18 million, that is what 11,000 couples get as a pension. Every month again, this amount is being paid. And it is money, in a way, wasted and will be wasted during the coming 20 years. Then the first question came up to me and said, how is it possible that all these elements of bad governance were taking place and this huge amount of money, because what I didn't tell you is yet that the cost of bad governance, I calculated it at least 450 million florins, which at the time, 2 years ago, was 1/3 of our total budget, which is a lot of money. And that was a very conservative estimate. So we were talking money. And I was wondering, these 3 elements of bad governance, the enormous quantity of money involved, how could it take place if we had, at least on paper, a very nice system of checks and balances, where these types of things are not supposed to take place? And here you can see how that system of checks and balances is functioning, at least should be functioning. Okay? I'm not going to explain it now because some of you have seen it the last time, and this you can all check on our website. Okay? But one thing for you to know, that in reality, this is what is the case. All these different institutions have been sidelined. There is a lot of the, let's say, advices, recommendations, warnings from, for example, the Social Economic Council, from the IMF, from the Central Bank of Aruba, all have been neglected during decades. The same is the case with the recommendations and the warnings from the Advisory Council. All the time, the stipulations from our accountability law has been put away. And that is the same thing with the Central Accounting Department that controls the way the government is dealing with the money. That could not do its work because never it had the quantity and the quality of people to do their job. Out of office, the first 7 years, they could not burn out the yearly reports, and never in the history of Parliament there was one report, one yearly report, that was approved by an accountant and had been discussed in Parliament. So that's a big shame, because if you do that in an enterprise, in 1 year, you'll be kicked out. And here, during 50 years, it's never been the case. And until now, you have only seen illustrations. I have told the story, but now you have to do some efforts yourself. Just read, lightly, for yourself, these characteristics that I got from all the reports from the Social Economic Council, from the Advisory Council, from Algemene Rekenkamer, from CBA, etc. All these characteristics come out every year, year after year again, and in most of the cases, nothing has been done with them. And if you think that was all, well, there are some more. And unfortunately, most of you have never read Report Korten, for example, which is a report from the Intelligence Office that describes how ministers, even prime ministers, were dealing with the underworld, to get really an idea how those relations work, and to say, hey, those people are not supposed to work like that. Now, if you put all those points together, the focus on 3 areas of bad governance, the huge cost that I described to you, at least 450 million per year, the structural sidelining of the controlling and advisory institutions, and the suspicious characteristics of government policy, then I, as a simple citizen, really get to the question which is stated there: can this be qualified as criminal governance or as governance criminality? And if so, can this lead to the undermining of our democratic state of law? Well, that is a question that my 2 successors will go and discuss with you right after this.
Thank you so much, Armand Hessels. I will briefly introduce the next speaker, which is Thodé. He may be renowned for his position as rector of the University of Aruba and a lot of other societal functions here on the island, or maybe his position in government on Moderator. You were almost to forget that he is a criminal lawyer by nature and by training. As a result of which, he is an excellent speaker to introduce the criminal law side of the question that was proposed to us by Armand Hessels under the title Government Criminality, When is Behavior a Crime? Glenn, the floor is yours.
Allow me to switch the slides. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. And to have a good discussion, as Armand wishes for and for which you came here tonight, about government criminality, I think it is relevant to first know a little bit about criminality in general. And very broadly speaking, to discuss criminality is to study criminal behavior and the attribution of justice related to this. And in our legal system, we can ask ourselves, we need to ask ourselves, what is criminal behavior? And it is determined through criminal law what is a crime. And that is why, preparing for this contribution to the discussion of today's topic, I decided that I need to take you tonight through a few basic notions of criminal law in Aruba relevant to this theme. One of the first basic notions I wish to point out is that in common everyday situations in society, human behavior is sometimes easily labeled and much faster labeled also as criminal when compared to how that same behavior might be labeled when tested in a criminal court by judges. This has to do with the generality, the general nature of everyday language and the specificity of criminal law language. Words can have a differentiated meaning in criminal law language when compared to everyday language. The main reason for this, of course, is that through the application of criminal law, a person can and might be qualified as a criminal offender. An offender can be punished, and this can have serious consequences. A person can be jailed. In some countries, they can be killed. And under certain conditions, this jail can be for the remainder of that person's life. This is one of the reasons why in criminal law, it is one of the most precise and strict, and in my opinion, the most precise legal discipline. I will explain some of this precision with you in a nutshell and in giant steps. And this will require just a little bit of your imagination. Let's see if it works for me. Yes. First, let's take a look at how human behavior and facts are converted into crime and punishable facts. This is through the transformation of a subset of facts into what we might call punishable facts. Facts are things we generally achieve that believe that are proven through evidence and that we believe to be true. This subset of facts into punishable facts is a feature of the principles and the legal language used in our criminal law code. The first rule in this criminal law code expresses the legality principle. This is a notion that no behavior is punishable except if it is covered by a legal penalty provision. Such a provision needs to be law previous to the behavior for which a person is prosecuted. When there is a suspicion that a crime, in legal language, that is a punishable fact has happened, the competent authorities, which in our system are the public prosecutors and the police, are responsible to investigate these facts. All actions and behaviors of these authorities investigating a presumed crime are also bound by the legality principle. Article 9, in the middle of our Code of Criminal Proceedings, states that prosecution of crimes takes place exclusively as regulated by law. And in criminal law, the strong emphasis on the legal penalty provision requires very precise scrutiny of the facts and exact reasoning as to why a fact can be qualified as a punishable fact covered by a specific penalty provision. We'll show some examples of this process by dissecting some punishable facts. This first example is the crime we qualify in Dutch as doodslag, manslaughter. As you can see in the slide, The penalty provision starts with the description of the punishable fact. Then it follows with a qualification of the crime, doodslag, and then follows with the punishment bandwidth. The punishable fact is described as, in this case, intentionally robbing another person of life. This punishable fact is then qualified as manslaughter, and when a person is convicted of manslaughter, somebody said it's sexist, it only states he, but she might be sentenced for a maximum of 15 years in prison, or be fined to a maximum fine of the 5th category. You might ask yourself, what does it mean? In the law, there are general provisions, and then each category has a maximum. And in this case, it's 100,000 Aruba florins at this moment. You can change that. Another example is the crime we qualify as mishandling or mistreatment. Here, there is no elaborate description, but the description and the qualification are the same word. That's why I colored them for blue and yellow. These were more general, these two examples were more general and quite simple provisions I showed just to give you a sense of how in criminal law facts are converted to punishable facts. But now I want to show some examples of crimes, punishable facts, which can be deployed to punish corruptive behavior. The first one is very specific to people working in government. This is an example of a specific government crime describing both passive and active bribery by civil servants. And you can see the description of the punishable fact is more elaborate than the examples I just showed, as you can see under section 1 sub A. This is the description for the crime of passive bribery. It is described as accepting a gift or a promise or a service in exchange to act against a duty as a civil servant or official. In section 1 sub C, you can see the punishable fact of active bribery, in which the civil servant requests or solicits a gift, promise, or service. And also, if you look to the bottom, as you can see in section 3, this punishable fact is more severely punishable with a maximum of 8 years as compared to 6 years of jail time if committed by someone in his or her function as a minister or a member of parliament. Well, once you receive a bribe, a promise, or a service in violation of the bribery provision, you might feel the need to cover up the origin and the source of the service or the gift. The source of it also. This can result in the crime of laundering. Laundering is also an elaborately described punishable fact, as you can see. It includes notions as true nature, werkelijke aard, origin, herkomst, placement, vindplaats, and displacement, verplaatsing, and so forth. This means that before the punishable fact of laundering is proven, becomes a punishable fact, a lot of facts need to be verified. To be able to bribe or be bribed and to be able to launder then, collaboration with more people is usually required. It might even require acting together in a very organized way. Participating in an organized way can become an organization with a deliberate purpose and intent, oogmerk, to commit crimes, which can be then the case when you collaborate closely in an organized manner. This is punishable, the punishable fact of participating in a criminal organization. The punishable facts I just shared with you all have one defining feature in common. They are formulated in such a way that they hold individuals criminally accountable through individual prosecution. The actions of each individual have to fulfill all the requirements of the punishable fact before they are found guilty. This makes prosecution quite difficult, and interestingly, in the prevailing practice of prosecution of corruption, many collaborators, sometimes all, can escape fulfilling the punishable fact requirements as an individual. It is only when we would sum the actions of many individuals working together that all the requirements of the punishable fact could be fulfilled. In this slide, 27 years of corruption research is visualized in a network graphic. It visualizes data about complex networks of individuals involved in corruption scandals in Brazil from 1987 to 2014. And now each vertex represents an individual, and the edges between vertices indicate that both individuals participated in the same corruption scandal. Now be aware that these are only based on scandalous cases. How many more of these practices are not more effectively kept invisible and are not taken into account? Looking at how people in government organize the way they bribe and launder, one sees networks of people working together, each fulfilling specific actions which in and on themselves do not yet constitute the requirement of a punishable fact, especially the more complex ones. But when considered together, we might get a different picture. Based on these insights, at the moment, studies are being conducted to research how seemingly innocent individual actions, when considered together with the actions of a group, say maybe a hive, constitute a network where there is a real risk that legitimate network and influence functions change nature and become corrupt. The World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on Anti-Corruption states it this way: corruption, the abuse of entrusted power for private gain, is the single greatest obstacle to economic and social development around the world. It distorts markets, stifles economic growth and sustainable development. It debases democracy and undermines the rule of law. It robs local populations, particularly in developing countries, of critically needed resources. Estimates show that the cost of corruption equals more than 5% of the global GDP, $2.6 trillion US dollars, with more than $1 trillion US dollar paid in bribes each year. The list in the slide is based on the Criminal Law Convention on Corruption and contains the prevailing, very damaging facts that need to be criminalized by law. Most of these are criminalized in some way or form in our criminal law code. But it is the prevalent opinion that the one in red, the active and passive trading in influence, is not yet explicitly criminalized in our criminal law. As mentioned, criminal law focuses on the individual accountability. This principle, combined with the practice of those in government and their influential friends working together in fragmented actions through their networks, results in a perceived impunity when those in public office abuse public entrusted power for private gain. This makes me beg the question: should we consider criminalizing collective, which means facts committed by two or more persons combined to fulfill punishable facts requirements when it pertains to government corruption? To end, can we then empower our criminal law and the authorities responsible for prosecution of crime this way so that they can take a bite of government criminality, out of government criminality and its undermining effects more effectively? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thodé, in your sort of, let's say, pressure cooker introduction into criminal law. If you find this dazzling, you get all the more admiration for our students who pass exams on this. Our next speaker is Emile W. He is a professor in criminology in the Open University in the Netherlands and can be found like a senior police officer, a researcher, a director for the Bureau of Integrity in the Dutch decentralized government. So he has extensive experience both in research, in teaching, as well as in practice to talk about his topic, state crime, good governance, and integrity. Emile, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Stamhuis, for this beautiful introduction. Good evening, distinguished guests, Your Excellency. Great to see you all here tonight. I am a criminologist, so I normally act in the twilight zone between social studies and law. So tonight, I have to change my presentation, sorry.
Let me do that and then we can continue.
Yeah, okay. I would talk a bit with you about state crime, good governance, and integrity. So a bit of everything. And to set the tone, and this was not in the presentation, but reflecting on our rector's speech, I was thinking, if you apply the criminal law, as you explained to us, the bribing article, why is the Kia so small? I will call that the Aruba's paradox, and I'll come back later to that. So, this works. Let me first explain a few things about crime, and not traditional, classical crime, burglaries, etc., but white-collar crime. White-collar crime is the concept introduced by Sutherland in the 1940s, and he was the first criminologist, sociologist actually, who gained an interest in researching corporations, big corporations, committing crimes. And at first, when he finished his manuscript, he couldn't find a publisher for it, because all publishers were afraid of lawsuits by these companies. So he had to adjust his manuscript and anonymize the names of these companies. And it took till the late 60s before the original version of his book White Collar Crime came into print. And you can still order it at Amazon or whatever, and it's very interesting to compare it with the 1940 version, of course. He defined white-collar crime as crime committed by a person of respectable and high social status in the course of his occupation. Weisbert and hundreds of other criminologists explored and elaborated this definition, but in a sense we deal with two types of white-collar crime: occupational crime and corporate crime. Corporate crime you could also define, in my opinion, as organizational crime. Come back later to that. Occupational crime is crimes committed by individuals in the course of their employment. Very simple, ranging from stealing pens and paper clips and notebooks and toilet paper and kitchen stuff, to sophisticated computer techniques to fraud your own employer. And the damage of this kind of crime is huge. It's more than classical crime. It's more than burglary and robberies, etc., in amounts. The other type of white-collar crime is corporate crime. And this is crime committed on behalf of the corporation, of the private company. So it's not in your own interest, but it's in the interest of the corporation. Mostly that is, of course, also in your personal interest, because you get a promotion if you do it well. If you are the owner of the company, of course you benefit of this kind of crime yourself too. Examples are the savings and loan scandals in the 60s, and the scandal, the drama with Enroy in the beginning of the 21st century. What made Enron go bankrupt, what made the accounting firm Anderson, who cooked the books for Enron, go bankrupt, and who left thousands of people without a pension because of this corporate crime. Okay. Yes, we're back. Organized crime. There is a big distinction between corporate crime and organized crime. And sometimes people mix it. But corporate criminals, make a crime out of business. Organized criminals make a business out of crime. So, but this is important. Corporate crime happens in legitimate organizations. And organized crimes are, of course, illegal organizations, where criminals organize themselves to commit their crimes. Some examples of organized crime: human trafficking, drugs crime, of course, smuggling of drugs, growing of drugs, chemical fabricating of drugs. Huge problem in the Netherlands on this moment. And that brings me to undermining crime. And that is actually a Dutch term, ondermijnen de criminaliteit. There is not a real good English translation for that. But what it means, it focuses on the effects of organized crime on society. So, in researching undermining crime, we are not so much interested in the crimes themselves, but on the effects in the long term on government, on the upper world, on society. And at the end of the day, on rule of law. And a key characteristic of organizations perpetrating such crime is that they make use of legal organizations. So to say, the underworld needs the upper world to conduct their criminal business. If you want, as a criminal organization, if you want to commit your crimes, you need the government. You need permits, you need licenses, you need information, but you also need other professionals. You need accountants, you need lawyers, you need notaries, you need banks to launder your money, etc., etc. You need also citizens. If you want to grow marijuana in a city in the Netherlands, you need hundreds of people who are willing to lend their attic to you to grow the stuff. And that happens in socially deprived neighborhoods. So that's also a paradox. In these neighborhoods, people living there, committing these crimes, are at the same time criminal offender and victim of these organized crime groups. Then state crime, the title of this presentation. Actually, state crime is nothing more or less than corporate crime committed by the government, governmental organizations, agencies, or representatives of them. in Dutch, overtredende overheden. A lot of research has been done on that. A specific form is state corporate crime, when the government commits crimes in some form together in cooperation with private companies. We also call that collusion, the mixing of the two. Well, some examples of state crime that I researched myself in the Netherlands. Accepting bribes from external parties. We got the provision in the strafwetboek van Aruba also on the slides. Providing or selling confidential information to external parties. Think of police officers selling information on criminal investigation. Think of politicians selling information on land development, etc., etc. Information is money. Favoritism by managers. Favoritism is, for me, the same as nepotism. It's the same as patronage. Okay? Favoring friends or family outside the organization and accepting gifts from external parties, from private parties. Okay, now let's make the step, try to make the step to Aruba. And we saw a lot of information from Armand Hessels already. On his website, all the reports you can download. But I sometimes, excuse me Armand, hear voices say, well, Armand is a bit preoccupied, and was it scientifically okay, the work, etc., etc. So I took two other documents as an example. The first is the Staat van Aruba, a research report by the WODC, the research center of the ministry, the Dutch Ministry of Justice. You can download it on their website. And it's already from 2011. I still discuss it with the students here. I'm also a visiting professor of criminology here. I'm here for the 7th year. And in the discussion with my students every year, they say to me, and you can correct that in the discussion, nothing has changed. I have to hurry up? Okay. I have to speak in the mic. Thank you. What did I find? Parliament and other overseeing institutions didn't do what they were supposed to do. And they focused on three areas: procurement, the vergunningverlening is permits, giving out permits, licenses, and human resource management. And they found that in these three categories there were criminal offenses to Aruban law. Another report, also criticized by some people, but I think it's a rather solid research by Professor De Vries from Nijmegen University, who spent some time here also. He focused on private companies in 2013. And he interviewed 97 CEOs of private companies in Aruba. And 25% of these CEOs were confronted with corruption in the government. And they were not satisfied with the effectiveness of government. And that's not good for business, I think. Almost 22% of the other group, so that was the group who was more or less satisfied with government actions, was also confronted with corruption, and almost 19% paid grease money to government officials to do their business. 48% observed nepotism, patronage, corruption. And de Vries initially wanted to observe it himself, to be present with talks between government officials and the CEOs, but he wasn't allowed by the government to do that. I wonder why. Okay. How am I doing with time? Good? Okay. The problem is criminal law. I follow up on Glenn Thodé's presentation. Criminal law focuses on individual accountability. That's what you explained to us. Government as an entity until now was never convicted for crime. Not here, not in the Netherlands. We have the Pygmea arrest, it's very ancient. 3 years ago, the public prosecution started to prosecute a municipality, a small municipality, because they had neglected the maintenance of the road, and someone fell with his motorbike and died because of that. And public prosecution said, well, this is a criminal offense, neglect by government, by local government, so we are going to prosecute. And that case is still under debate between lawyers if the public prosecutor is even allowed to prosecute. But it's a very interesting case. In the corporate sector, you see that. There's corporate liability. You can sue a corporation. You can prosecute a corporation. An example of last week in the newspaper, a Dutch hospital was guilty for the death of a patient, neglect of care, and the doctors involved and the nurses involved had already gone through the process of the disciplinary court. They have a disciplinary law system. And they were punished for that. One of the doctors had to stop his work for a year as a punishment. And nevertheless, public prosecutor said, well, if I count all these faults together of the different nurses and the different doctors who caused the death of this patient, then I think that the hospital as a corporation is liable to that, and I'm going to prosecute. That's also a unique case, and everyone is looking how that will end. And of course, a hospital is very close to government. It's a public task that the hospital is carrying out. But for now, not prosecuting the government, so we can prosecute individual politicians and civil servants. And then I come back to my questions: why isn't the Kia full of them? If I read all the reports, there's a lot of wrongdoing, there's a lot of bad government, all committed by politicians, by ministers, by members of the Staten, by civil servants, and they all carry on. None of them has been prosecuted as far as I know for this. 1 minute? Okay. Sorry? Yeah, that's true. But that's not done, is it? We come back to that in the discussion. Okay, so that seems to be very difficult. So another solution could be prevention. And why shouldn't we focus on prevention? If we look at prevention of classical crime, burglary, car theft, etc., we made very good progress. so we can also try to prevent these state crime. And then we come at the topic of good governance. Here you see 6 principles of good governance, and there are other models too, but this is a very simple one. In the middle, in the center, you see independence. It is of utmost importance that politicians and civil servants can do their work in an independent way. They shouldn't be dependent on all kinds of people who voted for them in return for all kinds of promises. Then you see the 4 core values here: openness and transparency, accountability, integrity, clarity of purpose. And that all actually leads to another core value, effectiveness. If we focus further on integrity, that one I wanted to show you. This is the national integrity system developed by Transparency International. I won't explain that now, but this is a very good framework to assess where you are on the integrity ladder. If you go to the website of Transparency International, you see the model and also all kinds of guidelines to apply the model. Then, I didn't know that you would be present here, but this is one of the slides that you showed here 2 weeks ago. And that's a very promising initiative, I think. Building blocks for integrity. An integrity bureau, an integrity chamber, and a corporate governance code. Excellent. So do it, I would say. And that brings me to my last slide. Aruba's paradox. I think everyone recognizes the problem in Aruba. There is no one who listens to this and says, well, I don't know what you're talking about. And a lot of people acknowledge the problem, I guess. And also a lot of people profit of it. And if the government changes, the other half of the island profits of it. I stumbled at the not so big demonstration last Friday near the Parliament. And I think that a lot of people working there got their jobs by the former government. But is this government doing better? That's the question. I hope so. And little people are acting to it. Because everyone who can get a job because he is a friend of a politician or some high-ranking civil servant, he accepts the job. And that's, I think, where it all starts. So, my advice to Aruba, and I really love Aruba, but I'm still an outsider. But what I would advise is put into effect the building blocks of integrity. This is an excellent idea, and do it. It's important. Give it the required funds. Give it the required independency. Give it the required capacity, etc., etc. Give the good example as politicians, as ministers, as members of parliament here, as civil servants, as police officers. Take care of each other. I mean, if you see that your colleague is acting against ethical principles that we agreed on, speak about it to him. Don't look away. Don't turn your back to him, but help him. Follow up on advices of overseers, like the Staten, de Raad van Advies, Rekenkamer, Accountantsdienst, Armand, you had all the red crosses between them, remove the red crosses. And discuss their reports and act to it. take care of sufficient capacity and independency of Openbaar Ministerie, Landsrecherche, RST. They are important institutions to safeguard integrity if it goes wrong, if the prevention didn't work. And last but not least, educate the citizens. Don't let them ask for jobs or favors. Don't let them bring politicians in a difficult position. And that starts with education. That starts at basisschool, at high school, at the university, also in the homes, in the houses of people. Educate your children. And I would like to end with this as a criminologist. My colleague criminologist Lacassagne, a Frenchman, said every society gets the kind of criminal it deserves. Thank you.
We now come to the question and answers part. You've been patient enough with our speaker, I think, as far as listening to it. I think quite some endurance for which you already deserve a compliment right now. Looking at my watch, I've tried to limit them as much as I could, but still it is about an hour of information sharing about what you've had to digest. Maybe while you're still digesting your early evening meal. But there is an ample opportunity now for question and answers. I will walk around with the microphone. I would invite you please to, because this is a multilingual speaker and also a multilingual audience, I would like to invite you to put your question in English as much as you can. If not, we can sort of arrange a way of translation so that we would be able to put our questions from the audience to these three distinguished speakers. Who can I give the first opportunity?
My name is George Rodriguez. I'm a nurse. I hope I'm not one of the nurses that will be investigated for the death of a patient. But I'm going to go home with that feeling now, especially as a nurse, as a citizen, because I see our government as a guardian of our community. It's supposed to take care of us, it's supposed to make sure we are safe, to handle our finances, to handle our problems. And now I'm going home with a feeling that they can, I know already, they can handle our finances and they can handle our, they are not strict enough to be respectable, cooperative, so they can deal with our problems. My question is, if we have hope, if we have hope, yes, it's going to be there.
Thank you. That's a very important question. And my short answer is yes, we have hope. There is hope. There are beautiful initiatives put forward by this government. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So, if we look back in 4 years, how will we evaluate this government? That is the question. And I'm convinced that almost all politicians who start their political career do that because they have a goal of like you say, taking care of the country, guarding the country, making the country a better country. But somewhere it goes wrong, and I think that is also that also has to do with culture. And speaking of hope, I think it's impossible for one government, for one term government, to change that culture completely. It took years to get here, so it will take years to improve. But there is hope. Absolutely, there is hope. But as I said, the citizens themselves play a very important role in this, and they have to keep their government accountable. They have to speak up to their government and not go along with this culture, and that is very difficult.
Not really the speakers. On the question of hope.
Yeah. If I wouldn't have hope, I wouldn't do this job of trying to make people conscious about what is happening. Because I think that in order to make changes, in order to improve, in this case, the quality of governance, that there should come pressure from under to move politicians, move the government to make the necessary changes. We can only do that by educating the community. And we can only educate them if we ourselves have all the information put in such a way that they can understand not only what is happening, but also what effect it has on their daily life and the lives of their children. So that is the reason we are doing this. If we wouldn't have hope ourselves, then this job would be completely a waste of our time and energy. And then I can tell you, I can assure you, I would be preferring to be reading in a hammock under two cocoa trees. I think we can manage, and I see the results of that in the ever-growing number of people that come and participate either in a symposium or in a lecture like this, and having also politicians to come and to show that they are really committed to try and participate in the changes that are needed. So yes, beautiful.
It's very, very short. I'm extremely hopeful also. I do believe that it's a collective job. It's not government only, the whole society. We should get engaged. The fact that there are so many people in this room tonight is already extremely hopeful to me. And I do also have a lot of hope because Aruba is an incredibly resilient community. Very creative. There's a lot of talent. We can do this if we join forces. And it starts by sitting with one another at the table, discuss the issue very sincerely, make it transparent, and then find the solutions together. I'm very hopeful.
Can I just ask an additional question in relation to the presentation that we've already done? In this collective action, what is the role of the criminal law?
Well, the role of criminal law, as I mentioned, also the authorities investigating criminal behavior, they need to have information, access to information to do their job. If the community as a whole creates a black hole, that kind of like an environment where the light doesn't come out, then they can do their job with whatever type of aspirations we have, expectations we might have of the criminal law system, it will not function. Next to that, we might have over-ambitious expectations of criminal law. It's not only a criminal law problem. We need to look at what administrative law, at least all of these other disciplines, criminality, but also good governance principles, how to actually create an environment in which you could say it's conducive to the right behavior. But yes, I do believe that we need to discuss the limitations also of criminal law, and maybe by discussing that openly with one another, we can find new ways to make the type of behavior that we believe should be punished by criminal law, that we should criminalize those behaviors also in a way that are prosecutable.
Another question, another topic. Hi, my name is Steven Pierron. I am an accountant, I am a risk specialist, pretty long list, so I'm going to go through more. But it's not a question, it's more of a comment to tie back to the question about hope a second ago. And I think it comes back to the last point I think was mentioned about awareness. And that's basically what it all comes down to. Because once again, corporate governance principles are principles. That doesn't mean anything yet. They're just principles put on paper, but without implementation, without actual knowledge about what they're about, they're not going to make a difference. And I think you need to have hope in order to focus on the coming workforce that we desperately need to come back to Aruba to. The young professionals that need to come back and actually make a push going forward into the future. And doesn't even take into consideration the damage that was done all these years with old-fashioned laws that were updated, with corporate governance implementation that never occurred up until shortly. So I mean, it's basically saying you have no hope, that there's going to be a change. So basically you're saying that you have no hope on the island and the economy actually working. But I think we need to, and again, it needs to start with awareness. And I think that's the most important thing, that you're already seeing this, just like we're doing with financial literacy and financial knowledge as well at schools. It's very important to also integrate the part of ethics, the part of integrity into that, and the part of good governance also.
Yeah, just to add to that, I believe that next to hope we might need vision and action. You know, there's this old saying that states that a vision without action is just a dream. Action without vision is a nightmare. And in my view, collective action without a collective vision is a disaster. So we should work on that too.
There are a couple of other hands already raised. I will work towards the third.
Hi, my name is Emile W. Usually hope is correlated with good intentions. I believe that our society does have good intentions, but when it comes to the execution, what is your advice in het kader van het goede, to execute it correctly? And my second remark is regarding the awareness. I think that we are very much aware of society on what's going on already here on this island. I think it's better to state that it's more time for the acceptance. I think we're already past the awareness part.
Any comments? I'm not so sure about that actually. Of course, people are aware of what's going on. Absolutely. But I think that most people are not aware of the damage that causes. The enormous amounts of money that Armand Hessels explained to us, I doubt whether many people know that these things that they are aware of and that are normal in Aruba, that's our culture, that's how it works, they don't realize what the cost of that is. They don't realize the amount of interest you have to pay every day. They don't realize that there are schools closed because of lack of money for maintenance work, etc., etc. So I think that is something we still need to put effort in to make people aware of that, to show them the consequences of this normal behavior, so-called normal.
Yes, and should be achieved, and then debriefed at the end. And in all the debriefing, there was always, there's no lack of knowledge, people know exactly what they should be doing. Still nothing changed. There is an issue, so what I'm trying to identify for us is that there seems to be an issue between knowing something and activating it in our surroundings. And I think we should really discuss and debate about this, creating the right environment that actually stimulates the right action and not stimulate the wrong action. At this moment, we might have an issue with that.
Just like Emile, I want to give a little example. People are aware that things are not really good and there's not so much money to invest in, for example, the infrastructure of schools. But they only look at the buildings. What people forget to realize is that there is no money to develop the contents of education. And maybe there is a reason that the last few years, the quantity of pupils, of students that go to Holland, go to a study, that not even 25% make it, not even after changing 2 or 3 times their study. So more than 75% of our students are failing. And in the first place, it is a personal disaster. But what people forget is that they're promoted to get as many loans as possible. So a lot of these students get loans until more or less 200,000 florins, and they come back without a diploma, but with a very heavy burden. And I think that the government is doing a very, very bad job in not informing our students how important it is to take this into account, to realize that there is a big difference in the diploma that they get here and what is really in Holland, the state. Because really there is a difference. A 9 year for Dutch on the report. I have talked to people, to students, to ex-students, who told me that they passed their exam with an excellent 8 for their Dutch, and in Holland she had to use English to make herself understandable. And that is what you don't realize, that the standards that were very good 30 years ago and that never changed anymore have really got us out of the road.
So we now have a few suggestions in the question relating to how to translate awareness into action. It's about education, it's about quality education, also related to primary school, secondary school. Maybe other suggestions or a new topic. Armand is hand already for quite some time.
One of the things I'm thinking of is that if I'm in business myself, I've been in business all my life, if a system doesn't work, change the system. And right now, if you have a company, you have the daily board that runs the company, the day-to-day, and then you have some supervisory board that makes sure that the policies and the expectations that you have for management are carried out the way it should be done. But in politics, it's exactly the opposite. So I think we have to take a look at those things that don't function. We go in Parliament, I've seen this many, many years, that the people in Parliament are nominated by the people that have to supervise them. In other words, Parliament functions are given by the minister who he has to supervise. So what happened, right there, it's a system that is built to fail. So I think what you need to do is have separate elections. We must have elections for the parliament members, so that they can independently supervise the government, and an independent election for the people that are going to do the running of the government. Then you set your expectations, you set your goals, you set things up together, you go and you see to it that it's being done in the appropriate time. But right now, we have a lot of things that are being promised, but they're not carried out. I didn't have time for it. So I think fundamentally we have to start thinking about maybe changing the system.
That's a good remark. I think there are two points I want to make about this. One of them is if the system doesn't work, you can change the system, of course. But first, I think we need to analyze why you're not getting the results. If people don't show compliant behavior to the system, then you cannot actually say the system is failing. It's only when people comply to the system and then you don't get the results you want, then the system is failing. You can change the system, and then people will follow again with compliant behavior, and you can really kind of like steer behavior with the system. That's one of the remarks I want to make, and I believe that in Aruba at this moment we have mostly non-compliant behavior. So if we change systems and people don't comply with the system through their behavior, then we're changing nothing. It doesn't have an effect. So that's one remark I want to say. Still, I agree with the point, and one of the important points that was raised is the fact that one of the features or the results of our system is in which elections result in parliament seats, and then parliament seats then maybe shift, the people holding the parliament seats, and thus the most votes shift towards government. You do get a result that is not intended, meaning that representation, instead of being in parliament to have the weight to supervise, you have a shift in representation in the executive. So that weakens supervision. So that is a system issue. So I agree with that.
Good evening. My name is Evert. I have a question that may be related in a different way, and particularly to you, Emile. When can you speak of systemic corruption versus when corruption becomes part of culture? So it is generally now accepted. Because then you're also talking about issues when it is a part of culture and it becomes accepted norm of behavior or accepted, as in the plan just stated. Then you also have to deal with issues that there is no really reporting system. There's a lack of journalistic integrity. There's a lack of research capacity for investigative journalism. There are many other factors that allow this to happen over time. So really, when can you talk about systemic corruption being present, which obviously we're seeing is here, but when does it go to the level where it becomes corruption that's part of our culture?
That's a very difficult question. I could ask in my turn, does it make any difference? Systemic corruption and a culture of corruption, it's a very thin line between it. I think that in a culture of corruption, you could say that it's more or less accepted by everyone. So if I look at what I read, what I hear, I would prefer more a culture of corruption than systemic corruption in Aruba. Systemic corruption also points at ties with organized crime, and I think there are examples of that, absolutely. But most of the corruption is petty corruption. It's the patronage, it's nepotism, it's small bribes for getting a permit, for getting to build something, to develop land, to get special position if you want to buy benefits from the system, then there's another one who is the victim of the system. Another one doesn't get its permits, or he has to wait for half a year because all the other ones who pay go for it. So I would, with a little hesitation, say it's a culture of corruption.
Maybe there is some room for observations of the other speakers.
I think we kindly lay our observations together with these.
But maybe you say that or
Yeah.
and inside you can always say I haven't collected evidence on that, and so I don't share opinions. Another question.
My name is Sarah Sambo. I just want to say a statement. A wise man once says, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I heard many times that we have good intentions. We must not have good intentions. We just have to do. If we have a law, we have a legislation that tells us what we have to act upon to do the right thing, then we just have to do. Good intention will not help. I just wanted to lay it out there.
Thank you. Then I will comment something about our culture then, after all. Because we do have a common trait in Aruba, which is a beautiful trait actually. We try to seek out to be beneficial in our actions and take things towards everybody around us. And because of that, we are insufficiently critical and set insufficiently sharp boundaries, even when we have a job to hold the law. And so I do think that's a cultural feature that we need to debate upon, that we can actually change and shift that without losing the heart, still be more logically critical about our actions and their consequences.
There is a question.
Thank you. Evert, I just have one question. The current government envisions a transition towards e-government in the upcoming years. A couple of the positive sides mentioned by the government and by people that propagate this are limiting of red tape, limiting of personal influence, and limiting corruption. What is your vision on the introduction of e-government for these purposes?
Okay, let me start this time.
Yeah.
Well, I heard the Prime Minister say you cannot bribe computers. Then I thought maybe if you offer them green electricity, they might. The point is, the beauty of automation, e-governance, you could say, but it really forces you to analyze the workflows, the processes. And you need to break down a process like, for instance, of a permit into steps, and you need to see who is responsible for each step, where is the permit request in time, which step of the process did it go by, who is responsible for those speed, and so on, and it makes things transparent. And transparency is really a good antidote against corruption and crimes. My own, again, experience was with permits of entry and stay over in Bonaire. When I first accepted my commitment there as a governor of the island, I was also responsible immediately for the entry permits. And it was amazingly bureaucratic. It was very prone to individual subjective, you could say, judgments and prejudgments of the people working to interact with the citizens seeking their permits. And what you saw, it was also very sensitive because of that for briberies. And the whole process was quite intransparent. First you had to be interviewed by a policeman, then you had to go with a paper to one office window, and then they would stamp that, and then you had to walk to another office window and drive your car to that other office, take another stamp. I mean, it took about at least 9 office windows before you could get the permit. We broke that down and we automated it into a process where you only go to one window where you input all your information. It gets processed, even though it goes in the back office with the help of a network system. It goes through all those steps still, but it goes into an automated system that's always showing, it's transparent about which step is being taken. And you cannot jump over steps, you cannot jump in time, and so on. It was all automated into the system. And it really cleared up and made transparent that specific process. And it's at this moment a quite clean process as I've been following it. So I do see a lot of potential in introducing e-governance in government systems and in the interaction with our community, and especially arising technologies like blockchain technologies makes that even harder to falsify information. So it's an incredibly hopeful process and development.
Briefly, please, because
I'm a bit more skeptical about this. You won't be surprised. Of course, there are a lot of things to gain with it, as you explained. But there are also risks. First, it costs a lot of money. This morning, I read in the newspaper that the new automated system of the Voedsel- en Warenautoriteit in the Netherlands, they stopped the development of the project and they lost 65 million euros on this. They came out with nothing. And that's not sorry?
Corporate corruption.
Maybe, no. I think you should reserve corruption for criminal intentions. And this is, I would call this niche management. And that's just as bad, but it's something different than corruption. And it's not the only example. We had this in the police, in the Belastingdienst, catastrophes with this automation. The second point is that it solves problems, but it also makes new opportunities for crime and corruption. I did with a colleague of Stichting University last year a research into serious integrity violations connected to organized crime in the police and the douane in the Netherlands. And we found that of the 256 cases we found in 5 years, I think about 20-25% had to do with opportunities that the automated systems gave these officers to fraud and to steal information. And of course you can prevent that. But that is again, and thank you for your comment, the difference between good intentions and acting. In these 25% cases we found, there was no monitoring on the system, and technically that is absolutely possible, of course. So if you do it in the right way.
Thank you so much. There is, in order to add to this skepticism, there is public administration research about e-governance in Africa, saying that if nothing else changes, e-governance will not change your political culture and your corruption level. Well, so there was a question here in the back.
Good evening, my name is Emile W. I think hear us struggling with the facts. I never produce facts with Glenn's presentation, with the fact that we are a small scale society, a small community. The idea that has some charm with it. I mean, Glenn said that it's something good about us. I mean, I know some of these professors come here because they like the fact that we are warm towards each other. I don't know if one of you thought about how can we strengthen our politicians to function in a community where people are very dependent and we are almost socialized to help each other. So my question is, I don't know if in the blogs from Transparency International you have ideas, but how can we strengthen politicians to function in a community where we are almost socialized to help each other? Because if you don't do something about that, I mean, Stamhuis said, if you have e-governance, if you have the bureau integrity, and I'm searching. So that is my question.
In most reports that you read, the blame is going very much to the small scale of these islands. The fact that it's very easy for people to, let's say, ask privileges from politicians. I have always thought that the small scale also have a lot of positive potentials. And I think we have to use that. In the first way, now that, let's say, bad governance and corruption is coming out of the taboo sphere, and that almost everybody now realizes that it is there, and it has a bad consequence for the whole of the community, that we have to change our own stance in this, not to keep it quiet, but bring it to the open. That is why I always try to bring up what's happening and make people, or give people this information to talk about it and to bring it out and try to promote them to help make people conscious about it. And there is one part of our culture that is still a problem of this, that we don't confront each other with the problem. I think we have to try to change that culture, to make people see if they're doing wrong, that they're doing wrong. And if greed, because greed is the basis of corruption, if greed is guiding people to do these kind of wrong things, we have to confront them and make them see that we don't accept it anymore as a person or as a community.
Do you mean that as answering the question is that this is what you need to educate the politicians?
Not only the politicians, but the whole community.
Yeah, but the question was how can we assist with our assisting culture, with our war assistance culture, how can we assist our politicians to improve their behavior for the benefit of their community? But maybe one of the other speakers?
Very, very shortly, I don't see anything wrong with our culture of helping as much. The problem is really when we misuse and because of that corrupt then our function. Also, when we lose the clear sight of the roles we are playing. When somebody comes to you, for instance, asking for help, as a person, you know that person, you can say, as a person, I could help you, but it is not in what is power of a function, I won't. I can only
just to come to tie to what Glenn said as well, I think that the inclusiveness and the helpfulness of the Ruby community is also what helped it make it so big. Looking at other island coasts as well, I came back to the first refinery, and the first people from outside Aruba came, how inclusive we were, how helpful we were, so I think that's a very important characteristic indeed. But I think one thing that was not mentioned enough in all this discussion was we're focusing a lot on the Integrity Bureau, any other instance or body of government that needs to provide oversight is that at the end of the day, politicians are not machines. They're all human. And like Armand just said, if you don't agree with something, you need to say something to the leaders when you don't agree with them. And I think the first, in a democratic country, the first way to do that is, of course, when you vote. So I think, once again, we need to go back, and it goes back to my first point about the other question when I started about awareness. And it starts again with awareness and educated voters as much as possible. Because you can have systems, you can have procedures, you can have anything. And as a former auditor, I know if someone's going to commit a fraud, they're going to commit a fraud. They're going to do whatever it takes. If it's part of their personality and their characteristics as a person, they're going to do it no matter what. They're going to find a way. So it's going to come down to identifying the person where you want to put your trust in and be an educated voter.
And you need to make personal integrity recognizable.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I promised myself I wasn't going to ask anything or talk, but you persuaded me to do it anyway. I'm very fortunate because of my work I get to travel. I was recently in Colombia and I got this book by the very renowned journalist William Ospina. It's called La Franja Amarilla. And in this book he disputes integrity and just good behavior. I'm challenged at home by my parents every day to be a decent individual. And in this book he talks about decency. To live in a society with decent people, but poverty isn't looked at as social contempt or moral, I think he calls it moral misery. And then in one chapter, it's funny because I just read it this afternoon, yes, and it's in Spanish, but I think we all understand Spanish. He says here, para mí es claro que no es el Estado el que puede cambiar a la sociedad. Al contrario, la sociedad la que cambia al Estado. And for us to do that, we need to become decent people and just demand that from people who are in government as well. And Glenn, I know we talk about this all the time. I know you listen to Bob Marley and you like his lyrics and you discuss his songs. I think it's about time we become more challenging, more accepting of other people's opinion as well, but that we demand decency from everybody in society. And I think Selena and other people talked about it as well. We live in a society where we don't have enough people to discuss these things with. I mentioned this the previous time where I came to your lecture. It's almost the room is filled with the same people. The number is growing, but we need to reach more people with this message. If we don't reach the bigger audience or, everybody in the Arabian society, we won't get as far as we want to. So I think we should just, hope for me is people. People give me hope. And that's where we need to go. That's what I'm going to say. Thank you.
Just one little reflection on that. I agree that, the state is an illusion. It's the human beings together that eventually constitute a community. I do believe that instead of demanding decency, we should be offering. I think you shouldn't demand anything you are not willing to offer yourself. So I do believe the change starts with ourselves by first offering decency to whoever is in front of you. And after that, I think that's a good example set usually inspires following.
A very small addition to this. I actually think that almost all people in government and in think that starts with agreements, with discussing it among each other, with agreeing to do it different this time. To say to a citizen who asks for a favor, I'm sorry, but I can't grant you this favor because that will make victims on the other end of the street. So I'm here to serve all the people of Aruba in this case, and not you personally, because you give me something in return.
I agree with you, but if the politician tells the public that how come the public feels entitled to go to the politician to ask a favor? So we need to change our moral compass as well. So it comes from both ways.
Yes, and it's about behavior.
Hi, my name is Emile W. So we discussed the moral compass, the current system where we have corruption within our culture, it's cultural corruption. We've discussed the brain drain and lack of educated people coming back to the country. We've discussed decency in our people. But then, considering the amount of people who are coming from abroad to live on the island, who desperately want to work here, which we do not necessarily share the same culture, how will we ever be able to prosecute past governments of environmental injustice, of public health risks that they've exposed our country to the lack of a national education plan where we maintain, for instance, public schools at the same education level. We're talking about a shift in culture, local culture, which is nearly impossible. I'm more of a realist. I always say hope is for the faithless. I see that indeed we have a government that is putting a foundation in trying to bring integrity for future governments. But when we look in the past, we literally don't have the people here, the brains here, the courage and support to prosecute our previous governments of the injustices that they have caused this country. So, yes, indeed, the people who come here I've seen the same faces constantly in these lectures. I agree with this guy about when you're choosing a political party and you're going to vote, you should actually educate yourself. But if you look at the websites of these groups during election time, indeed it's filled with promises, and there's no actual plan as to how you're going to achieve these goals. So, as I imagine myself as the average Joe citizen, my grandmother who barely finished elementary school, she sees corruption. She is aware of it. But if I showed her the website of our current political groups, she's going to say, yeah, she's going to follow the promises, and the question of how will this be achieved will never come to her. So when we're talking about people, how we should reach more people to come to these talks, these people should actually have the question to want to come to these talks. It's like reading a book. You need to have the question first to say, oh, I want to find a book in neuropsychology. So I don't know how, we've discussed many things, but we haven't discussed that the title of this evening, how is the government held accountable and when can we actually prosecute them if have possible solutions, but they're not really giving me the idea of, hey, I'm going to do this.
Well, about prosecution of government, that's a rising question, and also there are some, we would say, experimental prosecutions here and there. human beings, we as part of society, can combine our efforts. And I do believe in pockets of innovation. So when individuals, maybe you guys here, go out and you go into your friends' groups, all of a sudden it's like an oil spill, but in this case it will be a positive one. I'll go out there and sing the message. Be an evangelist on that side and try to inspire other people to join you.
I have another question. Do you want to comment on this?
These were very wise words. Good evening, John. One thing we heard today was there's a lot of awareness, but yet it's not taking that one step. So I'm guessing my opinion on that is that the rewards are still far greater than the risks when it comes to the individual. That's one thing to look at. I do believe that integrity and that whole process is a transformational process in nature, which means in the end it will bring the greatest good to the greatest amount of people when we get there. And then lastly, my question to Armand is, Armand, why should I set time well with your answer to this? My question to you is your slide of checks and balances, which was very illustrative. All the red X's that are supposed to be functioning. If those can actually be made to function, will it help? And who has to make that happen?
When I did this, it was to make clear to the moderator that the time for the end is coming very soon. We put it at 7 o'clock to start.
The moderator doesn't need moderation.
No. Because let's not forget, people are getting tired. We have all had a long day. Let's take that into account. Now, how do we have to make these things work? Well, I think a very important part in this play both the government and parliament. Because all the instances, all the institutions have a role towards government or towards parliament. Now, we are just voters. But as a matter of fact, we are the only one that legitimize the beings of parliament and government. And we have to come to the moment that they are going to listen to us. Not limit ourselves because it is our own fault that we are hardly ever listened to. But we have to make a voice out of us. And it's the second time that I hear that the same people is coming. Well, I see a growing number of people and I see new faces. And I see an urgency with all the questions that have come before, that people really want to do things. Some people have said, well, we make plans and talk about things, but actions stay away. Well, we have to transform ourselves to be much more active. It is part of our culture. I acknowledge that. And I hope that one day good governance and things like that become as important as carnival. Because in carnival time, really, then people don't talk about visions, they act. And they make the most superb creative things.
Thank you. I have two hands. And so no new hands, sorry about this. There is a hand here and a hand in the front. And I'll do it just because I'm the closest here, so I'll give this person the first word.
Hello, my name is Clouseau. My question is, does your dog bite? There was a first slide I remember. In the scene of Dr. Clouseau was playing in Atlanta, he asked, does your dog bite in the scene? And then they enter an escalator, and then at the end of the escalator, Dr. Clouseau comes out and is eaten alive by these dogs. And then he remarks, yes, my dog does not bite, but these are not my dogs. So maybe the kingdom can do something.
in February, and we haven't found a director yet. So please put your words into action, apply, and help us to build this big building blocks and make it a success. Thank you.
I think as a moderator, sometimes you are expected to give a summary of the presentations and the discussion. I think you can forgive me not being able to do that because the solutions and the comments are so diverse. But I think at least one thing we can take away from this, there are around, let's say, 78 people in this room. How many Facebook friends do you all have, or Twitter, or whatever kind of social platform you're on? Please put the message on your platform so that it spreads around, not only to this island, but around the world, so that there is awareness also that people who deal with the island, deal with the population, know that we are dealing with this problem. And I, sorry, to do it, I say we for the time that I'm here. So thank you very much. Thanks very much to our respected speakers. Give them a warm round of applause. Thank you for being here. Thank you very much. Stay in touch.